living with senility is never easy. It doesn't, I guess, in the end, make it any easier to understand that the person that you have known and loved for so many years is slowly disappearing. Although I guess you could say in a way that dementia or Alzheimer's is better than Lewy body dementia, which is kind of like Parkinson's disease in reverse. It is a disease that is so horrible that you start out with the worst symptoms first. And that's what drove Robin Williams as he slowly lost control of his body and his humor, and his health and his sanity. It's what caused him to eventually kill himself, because it was too much. Many years ago, probably 10 years ago, maybe more, my sister and I recognized that my mom was starting to suffer from dementia, but she wouldn't acknowledge it, and she would protest it and get angry at us, and she started to make unwise decisions. Now, you have to understand, my mom wasn't a stupid woman. She had 2 bachelor's degrees and a master's degree, and was not only intelligent, very intelligent, but she was also very observant and in regards to people's character. And so as we watched this mental deterioration, it was hard for us, because we know when we're whole, we know what's right and what's wrong. But when you're mentally ill or you have dementia, where you're losing your memory of things, you don't know. And if you do realize that there's something wrong, it can create a lot of anxiety. It can cause a lot of fear and then anger. And these were things that we were seeing in my mom, and she'd gone from a position of great intelligence and wisdom to into this slow decline, in which she was struggling to take care of her finances correctly and to eat correctly. And when my wife and I were struggling financially in Indonesia, my mom said that she would come out and live with us and help us both financially and to give us moral support. Unfortunately, partially because, and maybe to a great degree because of her dementia, which was still in the fairly early stage, it was sometimes very traumatic having her with us, for her and for us, and especially for my children. And it was painful to see her decline in her ability to use logic, and to sometimes be overcome by paranoia, to reverse her decisions midstream, even to the point of not being willing to help us when we needed it and we were very poor. And she would say, well, let's go out and shop. And she was saving a significant amount of money every month by living with us instead of living in Indonesia, because she'd given up her apartment and she'd put her stuff into storage, so she had a lot lower expenses remaining in America, and very little expenses in Indonesia except for helping us out. financially, and she didn't help out a huge amount, but she did help. So when things were bad sometimes, this dark side of my mom would appear, and it got to the point where she had alienated my wife and my mother-in-law, and I was pretty alienated as well. And then my wife was diagnosed with cancer, and we sent my mom home to America because there's just no way, with all the other things going on, that we could continue to, I guess you could say, protect her from herself. Because during the time that she stayed with us, it was clear that she was in dementia, but she was in denial at the same time. And I'm telling you this because I want you to understand what you'll probably go through if your loved one has dementia or Alzheimer's. I can't really speak a lot about Lewy body dementia, so I'm leaving that one alone. But she just deteriorated in front of us. I mean, she had her own bedroom, her own bathroom, and I didn't go in there because that was her private area. And finally, I went in there, and to discover that she had not been taking care of it. And if we did not feed her correctly, she wasn't going to feed herself correctly. But when she went back to the U.S., the day after she arrived in the U.S., somebody from the airline that she had flown found her sitting in a restaurant area in the airport, and asked her if she was okay, and she said yes. She said, I'm waiting for and I don't remember who it was, but she said she was waiting for somebody to pick her up. But the thing of it is that despite my frequent encouragement to her before she left, to arrange for an apartment, to arrange for somebody to meet her at the airport, and so on and so forth, to make sure that all her ducks were in a row, so to speak, she hadn't done those things. And in fact, I had to help her to get her tickets home to America, to where the city where she wanted to return to. And so she said so-and-so is going to pick me up, but that she had never contacted that person to make that arrangement. And finally, the airline took pity on her after finding her there another day, and helped her to get to a hotel. And my mom was so mixed up that instead of realizing that the discount that the hotel was giving her was still costing her, the discounted price that is, was still costing her way more than an apartment, she was like, oh, it's, they're nice, they're giving me a discount, but she didn't have a kitchen. And so it wasn't like living in an apartment, and she was spending way more. All the money that she had saved up while living with us was just being wasted. And I can't blame the hotel. It wasn't their fault that she wasn't moving on, and she wasn't trying to find an apartment or anything like that. But she was in the throes of dementia, and she couldn't make good decisions. And I tried to, once I moved back to the U.S. after my wife died, I tried to talk to her, but she was very, very adamant against it. And then, but within a year of, I think it was, or maybe 2 years of her having moved back to the States, she had exhausted all of the money that she'd saved by living in Indonesia with us. It was all gone because she was living in a hotel and having to resort to eating food that she normally wouldn't have purchased and stuff. And all of her stuff was still in storage, so she was paying for storage on top of that. So it was and eventually she got kicked out of the hotel, and my sister helped her to find a different hotel and got a little financial assistance from certain sources that got her set up for a month or two. And but that hotel was also too expensive for her, and didn't have a kitchen in it, and so eventually she ran out of money again, and my mom had to get her into a shelter. I'm sorry, my sister had to get her into a shelter. And this decline was very painful to watch. And then eventually I came back to the States, and so I was trying to talk to Mom because I was her favorite. And my sister was trying to talk to Mom, but the more we tried to convince Mom that what she was doing was a mistake, the more she fought against us, the more she felt like we were imposing our will on her and taking away her rights and trying to get all her money. She became very paranoid. She became very combative. And at the same time, she was becoming more and more irresponsible with not just paying her bills, but with not buying food for herself. Because as the dementia progressed to a moderate state, she forgot that she was getting Social Security income, and thus she did not think she had money in the bank in order to buy groceries. So she would go to the grocery store and purchase based on the idea that she had almost no money. And then, so she stopped paying her credit cards, she stopped paying her rent, she wasn't eating correctly, so she was malnourishing herself, which was accelerating the decay of her brain, the encroachment of the dementia. Sometimes I was unable to do anything at all for her, and so other times she would allow me to assist her in some minor way, like helping her by calling the bank with her to find out how much money she had. But it would get to the point where the the independent living facility that she stayed in would say, well, she hasn't paid the rent for X number of months, and if she doesn't, soon we'll have to evict her. And so I would, talk to my mom. I'd say, look, if you're not going to pay your bills, they're going to kick you out. And so eventually it would get to the point where she felt she had to pay her bills, and she would write her check to pay her bill for the rent, at least, even though she continued most of the time not to pay other debts like student loan debt that she still had, and the credit card companies. So she saved up a lot of money by not paying the bills, but she also ruined her credit. And it ended up that didn't matter anymore because she was so far gone that she didn't need credit, she needed help. Fortunately, somebody gave her a couple of books, I think they were about Alzheimer's, and she read them, and it helped her to realize that having dementia wasn't the end of her life, and that she could live with it. And there were a couple of times when when I came back from Indonesia, I was still struggling with my wife's traumatic 2.5-year struggle with cancer, and the trauma that I had experienced, and her loss, and having to come back to the U.S. and start life over again with my children who were having trouble adapting, and the depression that we were all struggling with and everything, and on top of that trying to cope with my mom. And when she had read those books and come to terms with having dementia, that was such a huge relief, because it went from every conversation to being combative and distressing to us being able to talk about things to a degree, as long as I didn't push. And I eventually came to realize that the less I pushed and the more I was just gentle with her, the easier it was. My sister had a harder time accepting that, because she was as worried as I was about my mom's progressive destruction of her own situation, but at the same time she couldn't accept that she needed to back off and accept that things were going to happen the way they were going to happen. So finally I moved from where I was living in Wisconsin to Ohio, because my sister lived in Ohio, and she hoped, and I hoped, that by moving here, my mom would want to come and move from Atlanta up to here. Well, I'm going to backtrack for a second here. When my mom was still down there, because she was malnourishing herself and we knew it, I had managed to convince her to accept to get Meals on Wheels. So every other Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I think it was, Meals on Wheels would deliver a meal or two for her. And around half a month after I'd moved to Ohio with my kids, I got a call from the independent living facility that she was in saying that my mom had not taken the Meals on Wheels meal off of her door handle like usual, that it had been sitting there since their previous visit. So they had contacted the social worker that dealt with mom and emergency services, and had gained access to my mom's apartment to discover that my mom was lying naked in her own waste, and had been for 2 to 3 days. Was very dehydrated, had some pressure wounds from lying on the floor, unable to get up, unable to crawl to the bathroom to pull the emergency cord, and so she went to ER, and then she was in the hospital for a few days, and finally she was sent to a rehab facility very close to her home. But the rehab facility was not a good quality one. They were not taking good care of her, and she ended up, in terms of nutrition, when she had been in the hospital, they'd helped her to improve her nutrition, but she was starting to decline nutritionally because they were not taking care of her properly. And so I spent a great deal of time learning about everything I needed to do to take on my mother's affairs and prepare everything so she could go into a nursing home. And we had gone down there, and fortunately, she was, after all that time, cogent enough to be able to decide that, yes, she wanted us to help her to take care of her affairs. And we were able, largely through my efforts on researching and educating myself, to get a power of attorney, which turned out there already was one. We just didn't know about it, and she didn't remember it existed, that she'd made decades before. And we were able to transfer her up to Ohio into a nursing home. So, what a relief that was. She was near us. We could drive 20 minutes and see her, and she was still fairly much herself, but much nicer person. That was one of the blessings that we noticed immediately of the dementia, was that she had become a much more pleasant and kind person. And not that my mom was a horrible person, it was just that she had certain neuroses, and sometimes she could be unpleasant and difficult, but she had always tried to be a good mom and tried to raise us up right, and do good things for us, and continue to do that, especially for me, into my adulthood. So, to see her in this shriveled condition, with her hair for the first time in our lives being long, and everything was a bit of a surprise, but at least most of the time she was still fairly much herself, although she was forgetting things. And then the pandemic, and we couldn't visit her, and they had a thing set up where we could do FaceTime, but sometimes the signal didn't work. And she had a telephone in her room, that from her apartment, but then they said that she had taken it apart and they didn't know where all the pieces were, so I couldn't call her on her phone. And then something happened to her roommate's phone, and she was clearly getting a bit worse. And then the next year, when we were able to see her again, My sister and I were taking turns getting her to have her cataracts addressed, because was supposed to have happened just around the time that the lockdown occurred, the first lockdown occurred. And I noticed that she was significantly worse. She was forgetting things that she shouldn't have forgot, and her communication abilities were much declined, and her memory of her past was much declined, and she was confused about who I was, and she was confused about who my sister was. Sometimes she thought I was my dad, and it was very saddening for both of us, and especially my sister, whom she, more often than me at that point, she was forgetting who she was. She knew her name, but she couldn't recognize her. And granted, my sister has changed physically very significantly in ways that are not important to discuss in this video. But it hurt my sister a lot, and it made it harder for her to visit. It was making, my mom's decline was making it hard for me too, but I owed it to her, and I still owe it to her. I visit her pretty much every week. But it was clear that there had been neglect of my mom, both her physical and mental needs had been neglected. And there were various signs of this. And when we were able to start visiting again regularly, which was in 2021, we started noticing various indicators that there was neglect. Whether it was malignant or not, I can't say, but there was neglect. And I actually ended up filing a complaint with the state, and the state said, yes, it's true. This place is failing in its duties. And I got her moved out after a great deal of trouble, because the woman in charge of sending my mom's records to the nursing homes that I was interested in moving her to deliberately didn't send the information and lied to me about it and changed her story, and I ended up having to escalate it to the parent company, not even to the director of the nursing home, but I had to go over their head and directly to the parent company, because the problems were bad. But by that time, it was like my mom often couldn't tell me anything about her past. She couldn't tell me about her siblings or her parents. She couldn't remember things that she used to be able to tell me about, and she was starting to demonstrate an inability to recognize me and recognize my sister that was more severe than before. And then she started to replace words with other words. And then she started replacing words with nonsense words and with sounds. And then she just would trail off and not finish sentences because she couldn't figure out the words. Then she became a bit aggressive at both the old home and the place she's in now, where I just visited her. They had to increase some of her medications. Then she became depressed, so they had to get her on antidepressant. And so she stopped being aggressive towards the residents and the nurses and the aides and stuff. And she's more pleasant and cheerful when she's awake, but she sleeps a lot too. And she's not mom anymore. She often thinks I'm dad, and if she doesn't think I'm dad, I don't know who she thinks I am, but she's often, sometimes it's not obvious that she's confused about who I am. Sometimes it is obvious, because she'll make comments as if I'm her husband, and she'll strive to communicate with me. Like today, when I was visiting her before I started this video, she was in a very good mood. It was, usually when I get there, she's in her bed and she's drowsy or she's asleep. But this time she was awake, looking up at the ceiling and in a very good mood. But her communication skills were so poor. I mean, almost every sentence had at least one nonsense word if she didn't give up. It was, oh dear. So, for a while now, and when I say a while now, it's been the better part of a year, visiting my mom at the nursing home has been, well, when it was the old nursing home, it angered me and it saddened me as well. But now it's just, they're doing better than the old place. But it's so saddening because here's this extremely intelligent woman who can hardly get a sentence out without substituting real or imaginary words or laughter or just giving up on a sentence. And sometimes I can figure out what she's trying to say, but a lot of times I don't know. And it just kind of breaks my heart. But my mom tried hard with all her shortcomings to be a good mom and to give me love. So I come and I sit with her and I talk with her and I laugh with her. And whether she's talkative or not talkative, sometimes she's very talkative and other times she's just too sleepy. I'll sit there and stay with her until either I have to go or she tells me it's time to leave. And there are times now where it'll be 2 hours before she says, okay, I'm tired now. And sometimes it's less than an hour. And again, oftentimes she'll get me confused with Dad and she'll start saying stuff that would be appropriate for a husband and is kind of weird as her son. Everybody who gets dementia, I guess, is a little bit different. Some people become nicer, some people become meaner. My mom became nicer. But you gotta understand that until your loved one accepts their condition, there isn't much you can do about it. And the harder you try to convince them that you know better, because you do, assuming that you're a good person, doing the right thing from your heart, the harder that he or she will resist you. But the more you just kind of go with the flow and do it easily and gently and stuff, the easier it will be. And well, then the problem becomes is if you and your loved one haven't got everything all worked out legally before they get to the point where they can't be considered competent and thus can't sign documents giving control over to you like my mom is. There were documents that it had been suggested to me to get done as soon as possible. I only got the power of attorney done, and now I wish I had gotten the other stuff done because it's too late now. And when I called up the ombudsman's office and said, what can I do? They were kind of confrontational with me and were assuming the worst of me, that I was trying to do something bad, that I was trying to take away my mom's rights or take away my mom's possessions, and instead of helping me with the advice that I needed to be able to best take care of my mom. And that was so frustrating because all I wanted to do was help my mom, but because there are so many people out there that take advantage of elderly, demented people, that they just repeatedly were not trusting of me and warning me, if you do something, we're gonna, she's gonna call us and we're gonna come after you. And I mean, literally, on more than one occasion they did that. So it was very hard to get advice. so I could help my mom. So all I can, suggest is I did not have the mental health when my mom's when I returned to the United States to be able to take her in and also raise two teenage kids. Financially, it would have been to our advantage, but mentally, I knew it would have been a bad thing because I just gone through supporting my wife through 2.5 years of struggling with cancer, and I knew that how hard that had been for me, and I knew that this would be just as hard, and was not in my mom's best interest either way. But I had to put my children and their needs ahead of my desire to help my mom. So it's been very hard watching this decline, being unable to have the kind of conversations I used to have with her, even a couple of years ago. I mean, I could still get advice from her, and now nothing. The conversation skips the track to something completely different so often. She can't tell me stuff that she knew beyond a shadow of a doubt. She used to, when her dementia wasn't as bad, she used to make up stories about what she'd do, like she had a job at the nursing home, or she was cooking and gardening and helping out in other ways. Now I ask, what have you been doing? Nothing. She used to get up and walk around, socialize. Now she stays in bed most of the time. The other day she was in her transport chair, and apparently she leaned over so much she fell out of her transport chair. So now they won't put her out in the common area unless they have a wheelchair available, and I don't have a wheelchair for her. And when I find her in her bed, she'll be usually on her right side. Every once in a while she'll be on her left side. She'll never, ever turn over. And if you try to get her to turn over, she'll flip back to the side she was on. And I don't know why. It is so hard to watch your loved one just dissolve before your eyes. It's so hard. But I smile, and I listen to her, and I tell her things about my life and about my children and other things, just to try and stimulate her for that time that I'm with her, because she deserves that. And I hope that you'll do the same for your loved one. Even if you had a rocky time with it, I hope you'll be able to forgive that person. But I guarantee you it's not going to be easy, especially if you fight them on all the mistakes they're making. So I wish you the best if you end up in that situation. And to be honest, I'm afraid I'm going to end up in that situation in the not too distant future, being unable to remember so many things that I can't even live on my own anymore. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.